No one tells you that the family you're proud of can be the one thing someone else is willing to fake. I didn't understand that all at once either. It came to me the way most important things do at my age, slowly. In pieces, I kept finding reasons to explain away, because I was 63 years old, a widower for 6 years, and for the first time since I buried my wife, I had something in my life that felt like it was working again. Her name was Claire. And for 16 months, I believed she was going to be my daughter-in-law. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you just joining me, my name is Walter Duncan. I spent 38 years running a cattle and grain operation outside Lubbock, Texas, land my grandfather broke with a mule team in 1931. My son Ethan is 31 now, an engineer, and the best thing I ever did with my life besides marry his mother. We don't have much, but we have each other, and out here, that's the whole ball game. Sunday supper is not optional in my house. My late wife, Dorothy's sister, my sister-in-law Patricia, still shows up every Sunday at noon, whether she's invited or not, and God help you if you don't finish her chicken and dumplings. We are loud, we hold hands when we pray, and we do not do things halfway. So, when I tell you Ethan brought Claire home for the first time and she had my whole family eating out of her hand inside of an hour, understand what that means coming from us. She sat next to Patricia and asked her, genuinely, not to be polite, how she got her cornbread so moist. Patricia held her hand for the rest of the meal like she'd known her 20 years. I watched it happen and thought, well, there it is. That's the one. They dated 11 months before Ethan proposed to her at the overlook above the canyon, where I used to take Dorothy when we were young and broke and had nothing but each other. He called me from the truck, voice shaking, and said, "Dad." She said yes before I even got the ring out of my pocket. I sat on my porch that night and cried like a fool, because for the first time in 6 years, this house didn't feel like it was just waiting for something. Welcome back to Dad's Raw Revenge. Settle in, friend, this one's going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Trust me, you're going to want to stay for this whole ride. Here's what I need you to understand about Claire, before anything else. She wasn't cold. She wasn't distant. She laughed easy. She remembered everybody's birthday. She called me Mr. Duncan for 2 months, until I told her that wasn't going to fly in this family anymore. So when the subject of her own people came up, and it came up early, because in my house family comes up early, her answer didn't strike me as a red flag. It struck me as a wound. My folks and I don't speak, she told Ethan one night on his back porch, about 6 weeks in. He told me about it later, sitting right where I'm sitting now. They weren't good people when I was young, controlling, my father especially. I had to put states between us just to become who I am. She'd even gone by her middle name for years, she said, to make herself harder to find. Ethan told her he was sorry. She said there wasn't anything else to say. She told him plainly they would not be at the wedding, and she needed him to be at peace with that. He told her he was. And he meant it because he trusted her, and she'd never given him reason not to. What neither of us accounted for was the rest of us. It wasn't that my family was unkind to Claire. They weren't, not for 1 second. But a Duncan does not marry into a family we've never laid eyes on. It isn't nosiness, and it sure isn't judgment. We just believe you understand a person a whole lot better once you know the table they grew up eating at. And by the 10th month of that engagement, the quiet around Claire's family had started making a noise all its own. It came to a head on a Sunday night in late July. Patricia had made a pot roast that had been in the oven since sunup, and we were all around that table, me, Ethan, Claire, Patricia, and my brother-in-law Dale, who has never once in his life waited to be invited into a conversation. Dale set his fork down, looked square at Claire, and said, "Claire, honey, I got to ask you something." She smiled. "Go ahead, Dale. Where's your family in all this?" The table went quiet the way it does when somebody finally says the thing everybody's been tiptoeing around. Claire's smile held, but her eyes moved just slightly. "I mentioned my parents and I aren't close, Dale." "You did. I'm asking about that." Dale wasn't trying to be cruel. He was just being Dale. Because in our family, God love him for saying it plain, you don't marry somebody whose people you've never met. It isn't how we do things. "Dale," I said, one low word, and he picked his fork back up. But the question was already sitting out there on the table, and no amount of pot roast was going to bury it. Later, after Claire had gone home, Ethan found me out on the porch with 2 fingers of bourbon I wasn't supposed to be having. "She's a good woman," I said. "Not a question. I believe you." He nodded slow. "But son, we're going to stand up in a church. We're going to make promises in front of God and everybody we know, and we're going to do it without knowing a single soul from her side. Her father was hard on her, Dad. I understand that. I believe you do. I believe her too." I set my glass down. But hard people don't disappear off the face of the earth. They're somewhere. They've got an address. I looked at him straight. "I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to know what you're walking into." I patted his shoulder and went back inside, and I let it sit right there. But here's the truth of where my head was at. I wasn't suspicious of Claire. Not really. If anything, I was worried about myself. Because the thought that kept crawling back up on the drive home from her place in Lubbock proper was this: what if her people looked at a broke-down old cattleman's son and decided he wasn't what they had in mind for their daughter? I know how that sounds coming from a man who's never wanted for much. But Claire moved in a different world than us. She worked in commercial insurance downtown, had friends who talked about wine regions, and had opinions about restaurants I'd never heard of. Her apartment looked like something out of a magazine, and there were nights, quiet ones, where I wondered if she thought we were a little too country, a little too loud, a little too much like Dale. What if her parents were the same? What if they had money, standards, expectations I had no idea about? What if they looked at Ethan and saw a boy who wasn't good enough, and Claire started seeing him through their eyes, and something shifted? That was my real fear driving north on 87 that Saturday morning in August. Not that I'd find a lie, that I'd find people who looked down on us. I figured I'd show up, take whatever they gave me, and try to convince them my boy was worth having. God help me, I thought I was the underdog in this story. Finding her parents didn't take a private investigator. It took a tedious piece of paperwork. Claire had moved into a rental duplex that, as it turned out, belonged to a property company my late father-in-law had part interest in, and which Patricia still manages the books for. Since the wedding was closing in, the leasing office needed her legal signature on file for tax purposes. Patricia had the folder on her kitchen table when I stopped by that Friday, and I glanced down at the copy of her driver's license stapled inside. Claire Renee Whitfield. Not Ray's, the name she went by, the name on her social media, the name she'd introduced to every soul in my family, Whitfield. Out of pure curiosity, I ran that name through the county property records the way I run everything else these days now that Ethan taught me how to use a computer. A handful of clicks turned up an old voter registration, a Facebook page gone quiet since somebody's college years, and a home address on Larkspur Lane in a town called Comanche, about an hour and 40 minutes southeast. I told Ethan I had a fencing supplier to visit that Saturday. He kissed me on the cheek goodbye without looking up from his laptop. The whole drive down I ran through what I'd say, dreading the moment somebody opened that door and looked at me like I wasn't what they had in mind. I came off the highway into Comanche just before 10 in the morning. Followed the GPS into a neighborhood of modest brick homes, clean streets, flags on the porches, the kind of place where folks know their neighbors by name and wave from the yard. I slowed down, found the house a well-kept little place with a flower bed running along the walk and a wind chime on the porch. And out in the yard, moving slow with a garden hose, was an older man in a faded Texas Rangers t-shirt, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, watering his flower bed with all the patience of a man who had nowhere else to be. This wasn't what I pictured. I sat in my truck a full 5 minutes, recalibrating everything. No gate, no fancy car in the drive. Not one thing about this place suggested these people had ever spent a second wondering if somebody was good enough for anything. These weren't intimidating people. These were just good, plain folks. And for one unmistakable second, I felt real relief. I got out and walked up the drive. He saw me when I was about 10 feet off and narrowed his eyes the careful way folks do when a stranger's coming up their walk. "Help you with something?" I stopped, took a breath. "Sir, you don't know me. My name's Walter Duncan. My son is engaged to your daughter, Claire." He let go of that hose. Didn't fumble it, just let it drop. Water ran slow down the driveway while he stared at me, and his face did something I wasn't ready for at all. It broke. Not with anger, not with suspicion, with relief. The kind that comes after 2 years of carrying something heavy and finally finding somewhere to set it down. "Margaret," he said, and his voice cracked on the name. "Margaret, come out here." And, in that instant, standing in the driveway of a house in Comanche, watching a retired man try to gather himself back together, everything I thought I understood turned itself over. Inside that house, everything I believed about Claire started coming apart, quiet and thorough, while I drank coffee I hadn't asked for and ate cookies Margaret served with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The house was clean, modest, and full of Claire's school pictures, birthday photos, a prom picture on the mantel, a college graduation portrait where her father, Roy, and her mother, Margaret, stood on either side of her, beaming. Roy had his arm around her shoulders. Margaret's face was proud enough to hurt just looking at it. These weren't the faces of people who'd been cruel. These were the faces of parents who missed their daughter. The story came out slow and careful. Roy had spent 30 years driving a postal route out of Comanche. Margaret had worked as a school secretary for most of Claire's childhood. They'd helped her through Texas Tech full scholarship, but they'd covered every dollar the scholarship didn't, no debt, and they were proud of that, deeply proud. When Claire moved to Lubbock and started building her professional life, things shifted a little at a time. Calls got shorter. Visits stopped. She started showing up online under a different name. Whitfield swapped for Ray's, her mother's maiden name, at events with people Roy and Margaret didn't recognize, wearing a version of herself they didn't quite know either. Then came the conversation about the wedding, and the ask for $40,000. Roy's counteroffer, heavy with disappointment, was every dollar they could give without touching their retirement. Claire's response was, "If you can't invest in my future, you're not part of it." Blocked that same night. Margaret slid something across the table to me. A sealed birthday card, never opened, returned to sender stamped in red across the front. Claire's handwriting on the return address label. Our address. I sat there, staring at that red stamp, then slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket. Opened the text Claire had sent Ethan the night before, the one he'd shown me proudly that morning before I left, the one that had put this whole trip in motion. "Sweetheart, wonderful news. I reached out to my parents. They finally apologized for everything and want to have lunch with you before they head out of town. I'm so excited for you to finally meet them." The kitchen went dead quiet. I looked up slow. Roy and Margaret sat across from me, completely unaware of the digital reality their daughter was building in real time, several counties away. I turned my phone around and showed them the screen. Margaret read it. Set the phone down gently. Didn't say a word. Roy looked out the kitchen window toward the flower bed he'd been watering when I pulled up. I thought about the drive down, my rehearsed introductions, my quiet dread of not being good enough for these people. I nearly laughed. Because I'd spent weeks worried Claire's parents would look down on my boy, that they'd be too polished, too demanding. And here they were in Comanche, on Larkspur Lane, with a wind chime and a garden hose and 2 years of unopened birthday cards. The person who'd decided somebody wasn't good enough had never been them. It was her. It had always been her. And just like that, the man who'd driven down Highway 87 nervous about making a good impression was gone. The man who drove back to Lubbock that afternoon was thinking about something else entirely. The difference between a good liar and a great one is that a great one never breaks character. Not even at the table. Not even when the whole thing's coming apart underneath them. I didn't confront anybody that night. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I got back to my place a little after 2, sat in the truck a full 10 minutes, and made a decision. Not yet. Not out of fear. Not because I doubted anything I'd seen and heard in that kitchen in Comanche, but because I'm my father's son, and my father taught me something about timing that most folks get wrong. He used to say, "Walter, the man who reacts first almost never wins. Let a lie finish walking. A half-told lie is just an argument. A whole one is a confession." I called Ethan that evening and asked how the drive had gone. "Fencing supplier," I told him again, when he asked. He said Claire had gotten the sweetest text from her parents. They wanted to meet him, finally, before they left town. I told him that was wonderful news, and I meant every word of what I said next, even if he couldn't hear the second meaning underneath it. Sounds like everything's about to come out into the open, son. I hung up and sat in the dark a long while, working through what I knew against what I only suspected, building the whole thing out in order the way I used to work a cattle contract. What I knew: Claire's real name was Whitfield. Her real parents were alive, heartbroken, and living an hour and 40 minutes from Ethan's front door. They hadn't been cruel or controlling every photo. Every word from Roy and Margaret said otherwise. They'd offered $8,000 toward the wedding, been told it wasn't enough, and been erased from her life that same night. And she'd sent Ethan a text, sitting in her mother's kitchen, promising a lunch with parents who'd finally apologized, which meant there was a next chapter to this lie already under construction, which meant somebody was about to be recruited to play a part. Who? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Over the next few days, I started listening different. Not suspicious. I was careful about that. I didn't go through anybody's phone. I didn't follow anybody. I just listened. The way you listen once you finally understand every conversation's been running on two levels the whole time and you've only been hearing one of them. Ethan mentioned Claire's boss more than usual. A man named Harold Pruitt, senior partner at her insurance firm downtown. His wife, Dana, had apparently been at the same charity gala where Ethan and Claire had their picture taken back in the spring. Small mentions, nothing alarming, the kind of thing a person drops into conversation when they're trying to get somebody comfortable with a name before that name starts to matter. She was getting him used to them. Had been for weeks, and neither of us had noticed. Harold Pruitt. I looked him up from my kitchen table one Tuesday morning, coffee going cold beside the keyboard. Senior partner, mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of easy confidence that only comes from decades of never having to explain yourself to anybody. His wife Dana turned up in a society column from a fundraiser 2 years back, polished, expensive, exactly the sort of couple you'd want standing beside you if you were trying to convince a family like mine that you came from somewhere impressive. There they were. I sat back in my chair and stared at that photograph a long time. That's when it hit me that Claire wasn't just a woman telling lies. She was trapped inside a prison she'd built for herself, brick by brick, out of a decade's worth of reinvention and a fear so deep it had eaten the truth whole. She'd spent 10 years remaking herself in Lubbock, and when her own father wouldn't sacrifice his retirement for one day of theater, it wasn't just money to her. In her mind, his modesty was a threat to the whole polished illusion she'd traded everything to build. To keep that lie breathing, she hadn't just distanced herself from Roy and Margaret. She'd had to erase them completely. And to pull that off in front of a family like mine, she needed the Pruitts to believe something true enough that two important, busy people would say yes without asking too many questions. What story had she told them? I let it sit 2 days. Thursday morning my phone buzzed with a calendar invite. Claire had added lunch. Harold and Dana at Blue Sage in downtown Lubbock, Saturday, 12:30. Underneath it, a little note. Can't wait for you to finally meet them, honey. This means everything to me. Everything to me. I sat with that a long while. Thought about Margaret sliding a sealed birthday card across her kitchen table. Thought about Roy's face when he read that text over my shoulder. Yeah, I'd bet it did. That Thursday I called Ethan and told him I needed to see him. He drove out that evening, sat down at my kitchen table, the same table his mother used to say grace at every Sunday of his childhood, and I laid it all out. Comanche. Roy and Margaret. The birthday card. The text. Harold and Dana Pruitt. My son sat across from me with his hands folded and listened without interrupting me once. When I finished, the kitchen went quiet a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" 4 words. That was all. No lecture, no blow-up. I need to go to that lunch, I told him. I need to build something bigger than her lie. And the Whitfields? I'm going back to Comanche after that lunch. I want to know if they'll stand in a room with the right people in it. And what's after that? A dinner, I said. A real one. The right people. In the right room. He sat with that a second, then stood, straightened his jacket, and said, "I'll talk to Patricia about the venue." That was the whole conversation. Patricia's reaction was a good deal less contained. She'd been in the next room, and in our family that isn't considered eavesdropping, it's considered being present. She came around the corner with her arms crossed and a look on her face I can only describe as the particular fury of a woman who fed somebody her chicken and dumplings and got lied to for her trouble. "That girl ate supper at my table," she said, "and her mother's sitting in Comanche with a birthday card that came back unopened." "I know, Patricia." She stared at me a long moment, then crossed the room, put both her hands on my face, the same move she's been pulling on me since I was a boy, and said quietly, "You fixed it. Not just for Ethan, for them too." Saturday came. Blue Sage is the kind of place where the lighting's designed to make everybody look a little more important than they actually are. Claire had made the reservation. I got there early like always, and took a seat facing the door. They arrived together, Claire in the middle, her arm through Harold's, Dana on her other side. Claire looked radiant. Harold moved with the ease of a man who'd never once wondered if he belonged somewhere. Dana was all warm smiles and careful posture. I stood when they reached the table. Big smile, firm handshake. "This is my dad, Harold," Claire said, voice bright with a particular kind of triumph. "And my mom, Dana, Harold, Dana, not Roy, not Margaret." I shook both their hands. "I've heard so much about the two of you." I hadn't heard a thing about them until 8 days before, because they hadn't existed in this role until about a week ago. We sat, opened the menus, and for the next 20 minutes, I watched Claire perform with a smoothness that, under any other circumstance, would have impressed the hell out of me. She laughed at Harold's remarks half a beat too fast. Referenced shared memories with Dana, trips, restaurants, family moments, and Dana followed along carefully, like somebody working off a script she'd only half memorized. Harold was smoother. Asked me questions about the ranch. Made informed comments about cattle prices. Played the part of a man who'd done his homework and meant to be convincing. Every soul at that table was acting. The whole thing was a stage, and there I sat, eating grilled trout and being absolutely charming. "So, Harold," I said, setting my fork down with the easy calm of a man without a worry in the world, "Claire's told us a lot about you. Sounds like you've been a real presence in her life." Harold smiled. "She's been like family to us." "Like family. That's everything to us," I said, and looked right at Claire when I said it. She smiled back, bright as anything. "Keep smiling, honey. I'll be straight with you both," I went on, leaning in a little, the way I used to lean in when I wanted a man to feel like I was letting him in on something. "My family takes things pretty seriously when it comes to doing right by folks. Ethan's mother, God rest her, wouldn't forgive me if we didn't do this properly." I paused. "We'd love to host an engagement dinner next Saturday. Nothing extravagant. Just family, good food, a toast. My people just need to welcome the folks who matter to Claire before we get her to that altar." Harold glanced at Dana. Half a second of silent calculation passed between them. "We'd be honored." Claire grabbed my hand under the table so fast I felt it in my shoulder. "Perfect," I said. I smiled at her. She smiled back, full, radiant, triumphant. The smile of a woman who believes she's already won. The trap was built. She just walked right in, smiling. "If you've been with me a while, you know what to do. Drop me a comment, and while you're at it, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed." For the next 6 days, I moved careful and quiet. Monday, I drove back down to Comanche. Called Roy from the driveway before I even knocked. He had the door open before I finished the call. We sat in the same kitchen, same coffee, same table. I told him about the lunch, about Harold and Dana, about the performance, about the engagement dinner I'd arranged. Told him I wanted him and Margaret there. Margaret's hands went still around her mug. "Walter, we don't want to cause a scene." I looked her dead in the eye. "My family's going to stand in a church and welcome anybody who walks through those doors into ours. She deserves to know who that really is." I paused. "And you've spent 2 years mailing birthday cards that keep coming back unopened. You deserve to be in that room. Not for drama, because you're her parents, and somebody's got to say that out loud." Roy leaned over and put his hand over Margaret's. Looked at me. "What time do you need us there?" Tuesday, I sat down with Ethan and Dale in my den and walked them through every piece of it. Ethan listened, asked 2 sharp questions, and said, "I'll handle the restaurant." Picked up the phone. That was that. Dale's reaction needed some managing. "I want to say something to that boy Harold on his way out the door," he growled, eyes narrowed. No, Dale. Not one word, I said, putting both hands on his shoulders. I need you to do the hardest thing you've ever done in your life. Not a single sound until I stand up to give that toast. He looked up at the ceiling, then over at Ethan, who was biting the inside of his cheek, trying not to laugh. Fine, Dale finally hissed. But I want a double helping of Patricia's cornbread before anybody else sits down, and I'm holding the door on the way out. I looked at him and nodded. That much I can promise you. Every piece was in place. Ethan chose a place called the Hitching Post, out past the edge of town, a restaurant that felt like a home, not a stage set. Private dining room, in the back, white linens, candles, warm light. Patricia handled the menu herself and set a small framed photo of Dorothy and my parents on the welcome table, because in her words, they ought to be there too. Roy and Margaret drove up from Comanche Saturday morning and checked into a hotel near town. Roy called me Thursday night to confirm. His voice was steady and careful, and at the end of the call, after we'd gone over every detail, he said quietly, "Walter, whatever happens in that room tomorrow, thank you for driving down to Comanche, for knocking on that door." A pause. She chose well, even if she doesn't know it yet. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just told him, "See you tomorrow, Roy." I pressed my one good suit Friday night. Went to bed thinking about a man in a faded Rangers t-shirt watering his flower bed on Larkspur Lane, a sealed birthday card with a red stamp across the front. A kitchen table where two people had been waiting quiet for 2 years for somebody to finally show up. Somebody was showing up tomorrow. So were they. You can build a lie as tall as you want. The second the right people walk through the door, the whole thing comes down. I woke that Saturday morning with a stillness that doesn't come from peace. It comes from certainty. I lay there a few minutes listening to the house, thinking about Roy pressing his good jacket in a hotel room across town, Margaret standing in front of a mirror trying to hold herself together. Two people who'd driven an hour and 40 minutes up 87 for a dinner their own daughter had no idea they'd been invited to. Get up, Walter. Let's finish this. Claire spent 3 hours getting ready over at Ethan's place. I sat in my recliner watching the ball game with the sound down low and let her have every minute of it. She came out twice to ask my opinion, once on earrings, once on shoes, and both times I told her she looked lovely, because she did. That was never the problem. The problem was everything hiding underneath the lovely. She wanted to head over early to check the room. I told her to go on ahead, that I had one quick call to make, and I'd see her there. She kissed my cheek, grabbed her coat, and walked out like a woman whose whole life was finally arranged exactly the way she wanted it. The second that door shut, I picked up my phone and called Roy. He answered on the first ring. "You doing all right?" I asked. "We're ready." His voice was calm, steady, a man who'd made peace with a decision. "Margaret's dressed. We're ready." "Good. When I text you, you come in. Doesn't matter what's happening at that table. You walk in and you stand there. You don't have to say a word." A pause. "Walter." "Yeah, she's going to see me the second that door opens." "I know it." "I know you do. I just want you steady for it." "I've been steady for 2 years," he said, "since the night she blocked our number. Every birthday since, waiting on a call that never came. I've had plenty of practice." Another pause, shorter this time. "We'll be there." I held the phone a second after he hung up. Then I put my jacket on, checked the small velvet box in my inside pocket, and walked out the door. The Hitching Post on a Saturday evening is exactly what it ought to be. Warm, welcoming, the smell of mesquite smoke meeting you at the door like an old friend. But that private room in the back runs on a different frequency altogether. Quieter, intentional. White linens, low light, round tables set so every soul in the room could see every other soul. Patricia had been there since 4 o'clock. When I walked in at 6:30, she was adjusting the centerpiece flowers with the focused energy of a woman who understands the details of a room tell people exactly how seriously you take them. She looked up when I came in and studied my face the same way she has since I was young enough to have something to hide. "You all right?" "I'm fine, Patricia." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She crossed the room and put both hands on my face, held my eyes a long moment. "Dorothy," she said softly, "used to say the truth always finds the most comfortable seat in the room, even when nobody invites it." She smoothed my collar. "Let it sit tonight, Walter." I nearly lost my composure right then. Nearly, Ethan stood near the bar talking with Dale, already dressed in his charcoal suit, entirely calm. He glanced at me as I came over. One slow nod. That nod said everything's ready, the room is set, do what you came to do. Dale sat at a side table with a plate of Patricia's cornbread and the focused expression of a man honoring a solemn vow. He caught my eye, pointed at the plate, then pointed at me. His version of, I held up my end. Don't you forget yours. I nearly smiled. They arrived at 7. I heard Claire's laugh out in the hallway before the door even opened, that particular social laugh, half a note higher than her real one, the one she uses when she wants a room to feel like a party before she's even stepped inside it. She came in first, navy dress, hair done just right, every detail in place. Harold Pruitt came in behind her, silver-haired, expensive suit, moving with the natural authority of a man who's never once doubted his right to be wherever he is. Dana beside him, elegant and polished, pearls at her collarbone. Claire moved through that room like she already owned it, kissed Patricia on both cheeks, shook Ethan's hand with both of hers, laughed at something Dana said near the drinks table and touched her arm warmly. She was magnificent. Genuinely, frighteningly magnificent. When she reached my side, she slid her arm through mine and leaned in close. "This is perfect," she whispered. "Your family is incredible. This is everything I wanted." "I know," I said. "That's exactly why I did it." She heard a compliment. "I meant something else entirely." We sat down. The food came out, smoked brisket, grilled quail, a spread Patricia had planned down to the last detail, warm bread wrapped in cloth. The table filled with the noise of a real family dinner. Harold was gracious, attentive, asking Ethan about the ranch with what looked like genuine interest. Dana complimented Patricia on the choice of restaurant, and Patricia accepted it kindly while privately thinking things I'll never fully know. Claire was glowing, relaxed, victorious. I ate. I laughed at the right moments. I refilled glasses, asked questions, and to anybody watching, I was a perfectly relaxed man enjoying a family dinner. My phone sat face down in my jacket pocket. One text left to send. I was just waiting on the moment. That moment came at 7:48, in the short lull between the main course and dessert. The table was warm, the wine was flowing, and Claire was laughing at something Harold had said. I pulled my phone out and typed a single word to Roy. Then I stood up, and the clink of a knife against a glass rang out clean and clear, the sound that tells a room, "Stop, listen." The table settled. Claire looked at me with that full, radiant smile, the smile of a woman who thinks the next 60 seconds are going to be a toast about how much he loves her. I let the silence hang a beat longer than felt comfortable. "I want to thank everybody for being here tonight." My voice was calm, unhurried. The way my father used to talk when something really mattered in this family. A dinner like this isn't just a nice evening. It's a statement. It's us saying, these people are real. These people matter. We don't say that lightly. I let my eyes move slow around the table. My father taught me the people you choose to bring into a room tell everybody exactly who you are. I paused. So tonight, I want to make sure we've got the right people at this table. I looked over at Marcus, the restaurant manager standing near the back wall. He'd been briefed. He knew his cue. He walked to the side door and opened it. And in came Roy and Margaret Whitfield. Roy in his navy blazer, the one that didn't quite fit him the way it used to, the kind you could tell he'd owned for years and saved for occasions that mattered. Margaret in a burgundy dress, a small purse held tight in both hands, chin up, moving with the quiet dignity of a woman who'd decided she was not going to fall apart in public no matter what happened next. They crossed into the silence of that room, and Claire saw them. I'd been watching her face. I'd positioned myself specifically to watch her face. The color drained out of it like a tide pulling back fast, complete, absolute. Her lips parted. Her hand, the one holding her wine glass, went completely still. The glass tipped. I reached over without looking at her, and steadied it, set it gently back down on the linen. She turned to me. Her eyes were running the fast calculation of somebody looking for the story that saves her. I could see it happening in real time. The search for the exit, the angle, whatever version of this she could still control. "Walter." Her voice came out thin, barely there. I went to Comanche, I said quietly. Not for the room. For her. Talked to your mother and father 3 weeks ago. Drove down 87 on a Saturday morning telling myself maybe I could fix this for you. Maybe I could give your family back to you as a wedding gift. I let that land. Found a man watering his flower bed on Larkspur Lane in a Texas Rangers shirt. Told him my name, and he dropped his garden hose. The air in the room had gone tight and still. Claire, your father drove a mail route for 30 years. Your mother was a school secretary through most of your childhood. They put you through Texas Tech and made sure you never carried a dollar of debt doing it because they wanted you to have every chance in the world. My voice stayed even, steady. They offered you $8,000 out of their retirement, and you told them if they couldn't fund your life, they weren't part of it. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. You don't understand everything that happened while I sat in that kitchen, I said, quiet, like a door closing. I saw your school pictures on that refrigerator. I held the birthday card you mailed back to our address, still sealed. And while I sat there, you texted my son telling him your parents had finally apologized and wanted to meet him for lunch. I turned toward Harold and Dana. Dana had both hands pressed flat against the table, her face gone pale. Harold sat frozen. Harold, Dana, my voice shifted, quiet and respectful now. I know exactly what she told you. That my family was small-minded and difficult. That her real parents had passed years ago, and she needed you to stand in as honorary family so she wouldn't have to face a big traditional wedding alone. She used your kindness and your good name to fill 2 empty chairs on a stage. I nodded toward Roy and Margaret, standing near the door. Those are her real parents. Dana looked at Claire, a long, slow look that didn't need any words because words wouldn't have been enough anyway. Then she looked at Roy and Margaret, and something crossed her face that was far worse than anger. It was recognition, the particular recognition of a woman realizing the person she thought she knew doesn't exist. Harold didn't say anything. He folded his napkin, set it on the table, the gesture of a man walking away who's decided there's nothing left worth saying. I turned to Claire one last time. She'd stopped looking for the exit. There wasn't one, and she knew it. She just looked at me, eyes bright, jaw tight. The whole architecture of everything she'd built was reflecting back at her off every face in that room. I grew up watching my father treat every soul like they mattered, the boy who parked cars, the woman who cleaned the office, the retired mailman who gave 30 years and got told it wasn't enough. I reached into my jacket pocket. That's the measure I was raised on. Not the address, not the title, not the clothes. I looked at her. By that measure, I don't know who you are. I pulled the ring from my pocket and set it down on the white linen in front of her. Not thrown, not dramatic. Just set down, quiet. The way you set something down when you've been carrying it too long and you're finally ready to let it go for good. Then I picked up the floral centerpiece from the middle of our table. White flowers. Simple. Patricia's choice. And I walked across that room to where Margaret was standing. She was fighting it. You could see the effort in her jaw, her shoulders, in the short, a careful way. She was breathing the way people breathe when they're holding something enormous and can't afford to drop it in front of a room full of strangers. I held the flowers out to her. She looked at them, looked at me, and then broke completely, not a shout. A sound closer to a whisper, the kind that comes after 2 years of carried grief finally finding somewhere to land. Roy pulled her into his arm before the first sound even fully left her. His jaw was tight, his eyes wet, his chin held firm. He drew her in and looked at me over the top of her head. Then he did something I wasn't expecting. He stepped forward. 1 step. Margaret still tucked under his arm, and he reached his free hand out toward me. I shook it. He gripped hard. The grip of a man saying something his voice still couldn't quite manage. I held it a moment, then stepped back. Ethan was beside me. I don't know exactly when he'd moved. My father's son shows up when it matters. That's just what he does. He looked at Roy a moment, then stepped forward and offered his hand. I'm Ethan, he said. I should have met you a long time ago. I'm sorry. Roy shook his hand, swallowed once. Roy, thank you, Ethan said, for raising a man like this. He glanced at me sideways, just a second, just long enough. In 31 years, I'd never seen him look at me quite that proud. Patricia didn't shake Margaret's hand. She pulled her into a full embrace, both arms, immediate and unconditional, the way women in our family hold on to whoever needs holding. Margaret held on tight. The flowers were still in her hands. We walked out together, Ethan, Patricia, and the Whitfields. Patricia's arm looped through Margaret's. Ethan and Roy walked side by side with the easy quiet of two men who just recognized something fine in each other. Dale held the doors. He'd earned it. Dale paused once at the front door, turned around, just the once. I looked back too. Claire sat alone at the center of that table in her perfect dress, in her perfectly built life, the ring resting on the linen in front of her, the centerpiece gone. Harold and Dana stood near the back of the room. Dana already had her coat on. Harold's hand rested against her back, and neither of them looked at Claire on their way out. Her friends, the polished circle she'd built her whole second life around, the people she'd performed for and constructed an entire identity to impress, stayed seated in their chairs with that particular discomfort of people who've just witnessed something they'll never quite forget and don't know what to do with their hands. Nobody went to her. Nobody pulled her aside. Nobody offered a version of the story that made her look better. Nobody stepped into the role she needed, because there weren't any more roles left to fill. The whole cast had walked out. She just sat there, finally and irreversibly seen. Dale looked at her a long moment, shook his head once, slow, almost sad, then let the door swing shut behind him. Outside, on the sidewalk, the cool, clean air of a September night, downtown Lubbock, moved around us like it had no idea what had just happened in that room. I stood next to my son and took a deep breath. He put his hand on the back of my neck, the way I used to do to him when he was small. Didn't say anything for a moment. "Your grandfather would have done the same thing," he finally said. "That was it. That was all," he said. Across the sidewalk, Roy stood looking out over the lights of downtown, Margaret tucked under his arm, the white flowers still in her hands. Both of them breathing the same cool September air, like people who'd just gotten back something they'd stopped believing they'd ever see again. Roy caught me watching him. He nodded once. Not a thank you. There wasn't a word for it. I nodded back. Some deals get closed for profit. Some you close because there isn't a version of yourself you could live with if you walked away from that table without closing them. I closed the most important deal of my life that night, and I didn't make a dime off it. Some folks lie to erase the people who loved them. She built an entire life on top of that erasure. And on one Saturday night in September, in the back room of a restaurant called the Hitching Post on the edge of Lubbock, Texas, every floor of it came down at once. If this story meant something to you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe, and leave me a comment down below. Let me know where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next one.